inside the Mr. Smalls Theater, the upper room here in Millvale, Pennsylvania, and it is a beautiful day here in Millvale, PA. I'm your host, Matt Gike, and this is Gike's Got Game. Back from a one-week hiatus, on the road last week, and let me tell you, I spent a little bit too much time on the Ohio Turnpike right around this time last week. That's what prevented me from getting in, and that's the bad part about turnpikes. I think it's tough to get off the exit when there is a backup. So apologies for the blank slate last week, but I'll try to make up all of that to you this week and this morning. Thanks to Brian Crawford for being here as always on the ones and twos, producing the show. And thank you for watching and listening. We're on Facebook Live, of course, but the engine behind the River's Edge is our live stream 24/7 at riversedgepgh.com. I'm keeping it simple today, and to pull the curtain back a little bit, I was up at PNC Park last night on Pirates duty for DK Pittsburgh Sports, and I didn't get out of there until about 2 a.m. with almost 2 hours worth of rain delays, and then an interminable ninth inning for poor Wade LeBlanc and the Pirates as the Cardinals took the win in the opening game of that homestand, and the Pirates have fallen 5.5 games back. But that didn't allow for much prep time for this show. Not that I necessarily need it, because I'm always thinking about Pittsburgh sports. So we're going to take a lap around the landscape here and do a State of Pittsburgh Sports address, if you will, this Friday. So we'll start with the one team in season, but I'm definitely going to talk a lot about the Pittsburgh Steelers. One preseason game in the books and 3 more to go before we can move on and get to the real stuff. So there will be plenty of time devoted to them and, in my opinion, a player that I don't think enough people are high on. And maybe that was an unfortunate turn of phrase, but I'm going to go with that. Also, the Penguins, we do have hockey news this week. They lost another player who has helped them in the past 2 seasons. Matt Cullen has moved on. What does that mean for the team? I'm not sure exactly how much, because I'm not sure exactly how much the Penguins were actually counting on Matt Cullen returning. But we'll say goodbye to the soon-to-be 41-year-old, and we'll look ahead to where this roster is, as we're about 1 month out from training camp. But we'll start with baseball today, if you don't mind. The one team in season, the season's looking like it's running slim in terms of the playoff chances. I mentioned the 5.5 games back. They're in 4th place. They've lost 5 in a row going into tonight's game against the Cardinals at PNC Park. I'll be right back there again with the coverage. And what I saw last night with the Pirates building a big lead against a clearly diminished Adam Wainwright, that was weird to see, topping out at 85 miles per hour. Something's wrong with the former Cardinals ace. And the Pirates took advantage, but for the second straight game, their bullpen helped blow a 4-run lead. Part of that was on the starter as well, Jameson Taillon. I'll blame part of that on the rain for affecting his curveball grip, made things more difficult. But even though we saw Joaquin Benoit blow the lead, I mentioned Wade LeBlanc gave up many more runs than hits in the 9th inning to put that thing out of reach. But for me, last night was all about Jameson Taillon, and we have to start taking the long view, and I feel like I have for the most part this year. Right around the trade deadline, the Pirates did make a push to get into playoff contention, and I was in favor of them adding to this team. Didn't really happen because my contention was that if you're within range of the division championship, which would get you past the wild card game and into the NL Division Series, then you have to at least make a push for that. But now that the Pirates have stabilized here, and it's really tough to tell which direction they're going sometimes because they've won several in a row in late July, as I was talking about. Then they went on that road trip. They sunk back down. They lost 2 of 3 to the Reds at home. Then they won a couple of series in a row, and now they have dropped back-to-back series, and it is looking very bleak for them. So let's talk 2018 and where the Pirates are, if they are in any kind of position to contend. I initially thought before this season started that they were in a pretty good position to contend in 18 and 19 because pitchers like Jameson Taillon and maybe Chad Kuhl, maybe Tyler Glasnow, we'll still see on that last one, would be ready to go. or at least more ready to go and compete and help a team win at the major league level. And what I've seen from Taillon this season, I don't know if I'd call it a disappointment. It's really tough to assess him that way because, number one, he missed more than a month with testicular cancer and recovering from that. Fortunately for him, unlike the Rockies' Chad Bettis, who just returned, Taillon did not have to undergo chemotherapy. So that kept him really on a pretty consistent track if you're just talking about a guy who otherwise is healthy. And to Taillon's credit, he came back and has looked not quite as good as he did before he left in May. And he had two, in fact, blow-up starts against the Giants and the Reds back-to-back that really inflated his ERA. But what I saw last night, I think I still see the same potential, and I still see the same talent and ability and poise, too, before the rains came and he was knocked out of the game partially because of that. So I'm still high on Taillon. I think Chad Kuhl and Trevor Williams have done okay. They look like they could be potential bottom-of-the-rotation starters. But the Pirates still need more from Garrett Cole, and they still need more from, I think, Tyler Glasnow at some point. We'll see if he comes up later in the season to help them, maybe even in the bullpen. Who knows? That's what they did last year. I still think his value would be greater as a starter. That's what he's been trained to do, and I want to see every chance given to him to squeeze the juice out of the orange there from a starter's perspective. I don't want to go to the bullpen just yet because, well, bullpen pitchers pitch less, and thus they are less valuable. So with a guy with Glasnow's talent, I would want to see him in the rotation. So I'm still okay with the rotation going into 2018. And I know you might look at some of those ERAs, especially Taillon's at 4.64. That's below average now, and say there should be some concern there. And there's always a risk that goes with young pitching. But you look at this lineup, and ever since the 2015 season, even in the 2015 season, it wasn't a tremendous offense. It was good enough that year. But the last 2 years, with Jung Ho Kang being in and out of the lineup, with Starling Marte either being suspended or, I would say, generally disappointing with his projection and his track, and Gregory Polanco, same case with him being out of the lineup with injuries and never really getting into that groove, or very rarely getting into that groove that we've been looking for from him ever since he was one of the top prospects in baseball back in 2013 and 14. I'm really concerned about this offense, and the Pirates are nearly dead last in the majors in home runs. Same with slugging percentage and isolated power, which is slugging percentage minus batting average. That's more of a measure of pure power. So you can't have guys who just have a lot of singles bump up their slugging percentage there. The Pirates are, to the point, right near the bottom of Major League Baseball and the National League, of course, in those categories. And it's really concerning because when the Pirates were in playoff contention, especially in 13 and 14, even 12, actually, that was a pretty powerful bunch of Pirates hitters despite the late season collapse and missing the postseason somehow. Since then, they've fallen back to earth, and I don't know whether to blame development or hitting coaching at the major league level, Jeff Branson and Jeff Livesey in charge of that. But they have not been able to ride that rising trend of power in baseball. And there were more than 100 players who hit 20 home runs last year. We're on pace for something similar to that. You see guys, of course, the top level guys like Stanton and Aaron Judge. They're always going to be the bombers and the players at the high end. But the Pirates don't have enough from their middle guys, from their players that you would expect to at least threaten 20 homers, at least slug close to 500 in this increased, enhanced, for whatever reason, offensive environment in baseball. They just haven't caught up. They've fallen behind, and that, I think, is the primary reason why they have not been able to get any traction in this second half. They're pitching, for the most part, let's accept the last two games. And you know what? The past 5 or 6 games have been a fallback down to earth for the pitching staff. Some of that's on the bullpen. Some is on the starting rotation. But consistently, the offense hasn't been there this year. And you need your offense to carry you for a couple of weeks at least at some point. And it just hasn't happened. Even last night, Josh Harrison hits a 2-run homer. You're thinking maybe this is the night the Pirates slugged the ball around the yard against, as I mentioned, a guy in Wainwright who was clearly not himself, and he was flown back to St. Louis last night, in fact, for a medical examination. It was so bad. But all I saw were a bunch of singles. And maybe that's all this lineup is a bunch of singles hitters. You have David Freese, who shouldn't be playing every day. If Jung-Ho Kang's there, that cures a lot of ills, but I feel it's a little bit unproductive to even talk about that right now. We don't even know if they're going to get Kang back this season. So if you're rolling with David Freese or Adam Frazier, as the Pirates have often this year, and as they are right now with Polanco on the disabled list, it's going to be a more of a singles hitting team. And Francisco Cervelli, even when he's healthy and in the lineup, which he is not, he was put on the DL last night. Speaking of players who need to stay healthy, he has not been able to do that. Even with Cervelli, though, he's a singles guy. Singles and walks. That's his value. And if you have enough of those guys, yeah, you can make an effective offense. But we saw this last year, too. When you don't have the boppers, the players to hit the ball over the fence, to hit it off the wall, to get you some extra bases, and not require 3 or 4 hits to even get one solitary run in an inning, that's big. And the Pirates haven't had that. You have Jordy Mercer, singles hitter. Starling Marte, for the most part this year, hasn't developed, and I know it's been a limited sample, but they need more out of him. And they thought maybe they might get more out of him 2 years ago, but it's been back-to-back years, disappointing power numbers for him as well. Josh Bell, 20 dingers, so that's an impressive development for the Pirates, but Josh Harrison has fallen back a little bit from his early season pace. You have Andrew McCutchen, give him full credit. He's revamped himself. He's gotten himself where he needs to be, but he's not getting enough support. If you're talking power, you either need McCutchen at the plate or Josh Bell at the plate, and that's 2 out of 9. Even when this team is fully healthy, Polanco hasn't shown the ability to drive the ball consistently. As I mentioned, Marte, similar thing. So all these players that you expected more from in the power department, it's been an outage for most of the year. And that's what concerns me from the Pirates' perspective, because you have Austin Meadows down on the farm, the center field prospect, or outfield prospect, we'll call him that, if he gets the call up next year or in September when rosters expand. More than likely, he's going to be at a corner position, but he has shown some power potential in the minors. Of course, the next step, translating that to the major leagues, that's always the challenge. And you don't see much power in the minors. Maybe a little bit on the bench. Jose Osuna, perhaps he gets more of an opportunity late in this season as the Pirates fall out of contention, or in 2018. But where's the power going to come from? I think the Pirates might have to look outside the organization. You look at what the Brewers did. Good example here. They plucked a player like Travis Shaw, who's played third base for them for most of the season. And he's played solid defense, but he's provided some nice pop for them. And he was discarded by the Red Sox. So the Pirates have to, once again, find these diamonds in the rough in other organizations if they want to succeed, because their drafting and developing hasn't done the job. And this offseason will be an opportunity for a serious evaluation, or it should be, for the Pirates. How are they developing players? Why, from an offensive perspective, have they had a struggle in keeping up with an increasingly powerful Major League Baseball from the offensive perspective? It just hasn't been there. They're behind the times. I know they talked about getting on base, and they're decent in on-base percentage, but you need more than that most nights. And the Pirates aren't good enough in on-base percentage, more to the point, unlike they were last year when they were a pretty decent offense. But this year, they're middle of the pack in on-base percentage, and everything else is at the bottom. So that's just a recipe for impotent bats. And that's the storyline I'll take away from a negative perspective on this 2017 Pirates team. So perhaps the time to start evaluating and maybe even starting to think about asking guys to work on increasing their launch angle. I know it's difficult to really improve in the major leagues, but some guys have done it. In fact, there was a guy on the other side of the field last night, Matt Carpenter, who went from more of a slap hitter to someone who can launch the ball. So it can happen in the majors. Dexter Fowler, too, in fact. I should mention him as well. He has the best fly ball percentage in the majors this year. So no stone should go unturned, is what I'm saying, in trying to find a way to get this offense in more of a competitive place, because it hasn't been good enough. Anyway, that's where I stand on the Pirates right now. Forget the bullpen for this moment. Forget Joaquin Benoit and Daniel Hudson and all that. More time to worry about that in the future. But the foundational piece of the Pirates that hasn't carried the water this year is the lineup. We'll take a step away, hear from Mr. Small's Theater in Millvale. Proud to be here on the River's Edge. I'm Matt Gike. This is Gike's Got Game, and we'll talk some football, some American football, to be specific. When we come back, the Steelers, and I think they're in a pretty good spot. Speaking of offense, that shouldn't be a problem this year. More after the break, right here on the River's Edge. Back at the Mr. Small's Theater, I'm your host, Matt Gike, flying solo today, although just to my left, Brian Crawford running the board. Couldn't do it without him. But if you're looking for a guest, you're stuck with me, in fact. I wanted some time to just stretch my legs and go over the State of Pittsburgh Sports, deliver my State of Pittsburgh Sports address. This is a good time of the year to do it, too, because only one of the three teams is actually in action in games that count. Now, the Steelers will be playing the Atlanta Falcons coming up here on Sunday, 4 o'clock, in fact. That's an odd one, a Sunday preseason game at Heinz Field. So a true warm-up for the regular season. Steelers working their way toward the opener at Cleveland on the 10th of September. In fact, they'll play 3 of their first 4 on the road. So maybe it could be construed as a challenge there, although not at Cleveland. I think they'll be all right in that spot, assuming they get Le'Veon Bell back. And let's go into American tackle football and the local club. Time for the Penguins later. I'll close the show with that. But I wrote this week on DKPittsburghSports.com as part of my Matt Stats feature, presented by the good folks at Schneider Downs. You can check it out there on the website. If you've not subscribed, you can at least get a little bit of a preview, and then maybe we can convince you to come on board. But the gist of my story was that looking at some new research, the return of Martavis Bryant to this team, assuming all goes well with the reinstatement process. I know that has been a struggle for Bryant, and I'm not sure exactly what the NFL has been looking for and why it's held things up in getting Bryant all the way back, getting him into game action and reinstating him completely after his year-long marijuana suspension. But neither here nor there. If, like I said, if we assume that Bell's on the field in Cleveland in a few weeks, and we assume that Bryant is on the field, the Steelers team will be able to get to that fabled 30 points a game goal that they've been setting out there ever since Bell showed up 4 years ago. And with the addition of Bryant 3 years ago, they really could do anything they wanted to on offense when all those players were on the field. But according to the wonderful DVOA stat on footballoutsiders.com, and I encourage you to check out their work. It's one of the few advanced statistical sites that you can find on football. For the most part, football is still very much stuck in the past in the mainstream stat sphere. But for Football Outsiders and DVOA, which measures efficiency, both offensively, defensively, special teams, you can use it in a variety of ways. The Steelers have been the best offense in football when they have all 4 of those players, the 4 big players, Bell, Bryant, Brown, and Roethlisberger. Sorry, I don't think I mentioned Brown and Roethlisberger. I just assumed you knew who I was talking about when I mentioned the big 3 or the big 4 in this case. And I definitely include Bryant in that regard. But since Bryant joined the team in 2014, the Steelers have played, or pardon me, 2015, the Steelers have played 56 regular season games plus the playoffs, a couple more on top of that. And only in 11 of those 56 have Bryant, Bell, Brown, and Roethlisberger all been active. So that's about 20%. 1 out of 5 since Bryant came into the league out of Clemson, one of the top wide receiver talents we've seen in the league in a while. Only in 20% of those games, 1 out of 5, have the Steelers had all of them. So nothing you can do about that except take precautions and pray for good health. And maybe that's a fool's errand in the sport of football. Maybe the Steelers relied too much on these guys, and they've tried to fix that, I think, with the drafting of a good young wideout in Juju Smith-Schuster this spring, and he got a little injured in training camp out on the Trobe last week. doesn't look to be serious, and I think they will need him because you can't just go on 2 wide receivers in the NFL. But to my point, this star system, if they are available, it should propel the Steelers once again into Super Bowl contention. And in particular, Bryant, and I talked about DVOA, which stands for, if you care, defense adjusted value over average. With Bryant in the lineup over the past 3 seasons, and of course last season was a total wash in that regard, but with him in the lineup, the Steelers not only have averaged nearly 28 points per game, they've also been 19% above average by DVOA on offense. And compare that to without Bryant when they're under 10% above average. Still a good offense without him, but the Bryant effect, in fact, by DVOA and points per game and yards per game if you're into that, which is less of an exact measure, but I'll throw that out there too. All those things are more profound with or without Bryant compared to with or without Le'Veon Bell. And I'm a huge Le'Veon Bell fan. I think he's the perfect modern back. He's great coming out of the backfield to catch passes, and of course the traditional skills for a back. He's got them all. He's big, he's strong, he's fast, he's agile, he's nimble, he's quick. I could rattle off several more adjectives, but you get the point. When Bell's on the field, the Steelers are a lot better. They have more options. They're more well-balanced. But at least by one measure, the with or without you stats with Martavis Bryant, it appears he is at the very least just as important as Bell, if not more so. And it's tough to tell what the effect of Antonio Brown is on the offense in that way because he's only missed 2 games out of the past 70. So good for him for staying healthy, for staying on the field. A bit easier for a wide receiver to do that than a running back in the case of Bell or a quarterback in the case of Roethlisberger. But even Roethlisberger, for all the times he's been on the injury report, for all the times that he's had to fight through stuff, and those have compromised him, those situations. But he's only missed a handful of games. I believe it's been 6 over the past 4 seasons. And you might imagine, and it is the case, without Roethlisberger, this is a below-average offense. So, of course, it all comes down to the quarterback. But I think Bryant is higher up on that hierarchy of importance than most people might give him credit for. And maybe it's a case of out of sight, out of mind last year. Maybe Steelers fans have just emotionally detached themselves from Bryant because they don't want to get hurt again if he gets suspended. And to be clear, Bryant is hurting himself and his team more than the fans. But just speaking from a fan's perspective, I've been one for a long time. Once a player isn't available, like we saw in the case of the Pirates with Jung Ho Kang or Starling Marte in the first 3 months of this season, you detach yourself in order to not think about it too much. So maybe there's some of that going on, but when the ball is snapped in Cleveland in early September, I think we're all going to realize anew how important the field-stretching skills of Martavis Bryant are to this offense. And the question marks are still there on defense. Will Ryan Shazier stay healthy? Will Vince Williams be able to fill in for Lawrence Timmons? Will this defensive backfield be able to keep up? That's where they have struggled. Again, I turn to Football Outsiders research for this, but the Steelers in a nickel package, 5 defensive backs, or a dime package, 6 defensive backs, they were below average last year, and they're still trying to work their way into that with young guys like Sean Davis and Artie Burns and maybe a couple more players added this year. Perhaps Senquez Golson can stay on the field. All these things need to happen because in the NFL, it's not like your dad's NFL. And you probably already know this if you're a smart sports fan, but in the NFL, you have to be able to pass and you have to be able to stop the pass. The run is secondary. The Steelers have a good defensive line. They have a good linebacking core, but you have to be able to cover, and they haven't been able to do that well enough in recent years. But if this offense keeps the big 4 on the field, like I said, it might not require very much from the defensive side. We could see a lot of run-and-gun games that could cause many of you heart attacks during these upcoming fall weekends. But, hey, there have been teams that have won without great defenses. The Green Bay Packers, when they beat the Steelers a few years back in the Super Bowl, that was a case of that. The New Orleans Saints, when they got their one Super Bowl, same thing. The New England Patriots have been better on offense than on defense in many of their championship years, especially recently. That's just the way it goes, and with a focus on the passing game, too. The Steelers have it on offense. Do they have it on defense? I'm not sure. maybe they can just bludgeon teams to death with their offensive might coming up this season. All things considered, as I said at the top of this segment, I think this is a Super Bowl contending team. Unlike the Pirates, which still need a lot to go right on the offensive side, the Steelers have that secured, or at least they should, barring an injury. Now, if there is an injury, then we can talk about things in a different light. But until then, this team's right up there with the Patriots in my mind, and they still have to get past New England. That's a big but. That's a big what if. However, they're going to put themselves in position once again. The schedule isn't that tough, and in fact, you look at the first run up to that bye week in Week 9. They have the bye week right in the middle of the schedule. You have teams like Minnesota, Chicago. I don't think Baltimore is that good. Jacksonville, Detroit, Cleveland, all in the first half. I think we could easily be looking at a 6-2 or 7-1 football team coming out of that bye, and that puts you in a great spot to get a bye in the first round of the playoffs, which the Steelers haven't had in the past few seasons. That's also important too. So the goal isn't necessarily to beat New England. For me, the bigger goal is to get that bye and to not have to play that extra postseason game in the first round. Maybe much of that will depend on the defense, because I think the offense will be there, and I'm not alone in that assessment. This is not brain surgery here on the River's Edge this morning, but let's all understand that the power of this offense should be enough to put them in position to once again make a serious run at a 7th championship. Let's step out on the River's Edge. When I come back, it's Penguins time. We'll talk about Matt Cullen, the impact of his signing with his home state, Minnesota Wild, and whether the Penguins were blindsided at all by this, or if it's all part of the plan, as the Joker once said. I'm Matt Gike, and this is Gike's Got Game. Welcome back inside Mr. Small's Theater, legendary spot for Pittsburgh entertainment. We're here in Millvale, PA, just up the Allegheny from downtown. And I am your host, Matt Gike. This is a new kind of radio here at the River's Edge, and I like to consider this a new kind of sports talk. Although a little more traditional today, I'm just taking a lap around the Pittsburgh sports scene and delivering my State of the Union address, if you will. And if you weren't listening in the first portion of this program, Pirates down, Steelers, I think, up. You probably knew that already. And we'll get to hockey in just a bit. But I wanted to comment about it, a really appropriate scene, I thought, last night. I mentioned the rain delays at the Pirates game I was covering for DK Pittsburgh Sports. Pirates ended up losing to the Cardinals 11-7. It took forever to play it. Even without the rain delays, it would have been a longer game than usual. But the game ended around 12:20 a.m., and there was still a decent amount of people sticking around, and I was wondering exactly why, but then I realized it was Faith Night at PNC Park, and several of the Pirates players and staffers, including Clint Hurdle, were scheduled to come out onto the field and talk to some of the church groups, mostly, who made the trip in to listen to them talk about their religious faith. And I'm thinking it took a lot of faith to hang in throughout that game. So a true test of your perseverance there in at least one way, if you were there for Faith Night last night. So there you go. You had to wait through some rain and a endless ninth inning if you are a Pirates fan. Cardinals batted around, and as midnight approached, I started to wonder, really, is it all worth it? Do we really have to play this ninth inning after the Cardinals took a 4-run lead and pretty much put that one out of reach? But as you know, baseball has no clock. There is no mercy rule, at least in Major League Baseball. They might consider that in the future. And they do play all 9 no matter what, except for in the case of some rain, and unfortunately there wasn't enough rain to put all concerned out of their misery on Thursday night at PNC Park. But the homestand continues. Hey, it's baseball. It's fun to be outside for the most part, even on a rainy, soggy August evening, I think. Let's bring in Brian Crawford, the producer of this show, running the board as always. And I know, Brian, I'm down on the Pirates, as most people are, but 2 out of 3 ain't bad in Pittsburgh. We're still really lucky in this city.
Yeah.
We have a team in the Steelers that I just said is, I think, well-positioned to make a run at a 7th World Championship and get back to the Super Bowl for the first time in several seasons. And then we have the Penguins, who have won 3 Stanley Cups this century. They've won back-to-back. They're in a good spot to at least make a serious run at a repeat. So I'm always, whenever I criticize the Pirates, I always think, well, it could be a lot worse for Pittsburgh sports fans, assuming you do root for all 3. There are some people who just cheer for the Pirates primarily, or just the Penguins, or just the Steelers. But I was raised rooting for all 3, so for me, I see them as a group.
Yeah, no, I agree. We are very lucky. I'm here this morning with my own performance-enhancing drug.
No, yeah.
Yeah, trying to keep myself awake.
Don't test him after this.
Yeah, the River's Edge could be in trouble. So,
put you on suspension.
Yeah. So, it is good. 2 out of 3, and it's interesting. The Penguins, their success in just such a short time is really what's I think is really staggering. If you think about it, they've now have as many championships as the Pirates in
50 years.
Yeah, 50 years. Versus the Pirates have been around forever. So it's incredible. Every year there's an opportunity to win, and there are some cities that have never seen a championship, let alone having 16.
Gosh, I'd have to add it up. Yeah, it's 5 for the Pirates, 5 for the Penguins, yeah, and 6 more for the Steelers. If you don't count a couple of ABA teams that were in the late 60s, early 70s. But if we're talking major professional leagues that are still around right now, tough to beat, particularly for a 3-sport city. We don't have a basketball team anymore. So
also a small market, too.
Yeah, it's the 22nd largest market in all of America pertaining to TV, I want to say. So that's a pretty good gauge of where we stand. Mm-hmm. And it does make sense that the one sport in which we've struggled lately is baseball, because there is no salary cap and it's more of an open market system. But sure, the cap and the sports socialism that goes on in football and hockey, it's been very beneficial for us.
You also have to play the game correctly, and you also have to have owners that are willing to
management.
You still have to have owners that are willing to spend as well, because you do have some teams under the salary cap that just don't even spend to the salary cap. So, we've been lucky to have owners that are willing to spend sensibly up to that cap.
And I think they also realize that if you put a winner on the field or on the ice here, people are going to turn out. And it's happened for the Penguins. I don't know how many sellouts they have in a row. Yeah, they have not sold out a game at the new building, which opened in 2010. So that says all you need to know there. And the season ticket waiting list for the Steelers is still very long. So I think
I think that's the trick. The Steelers,
people drop out,
they'll have a subpar year, not even a bad year. They'll get around 500, and the attendance will plummet. But they've sold so many season tickets that it doesn't matter. They're still getting the money whether people show up or not.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't look great on TV or if you're there in person. All those yellow seats. I often wonder if they regret making those seats yellow, because it's so obvious who is not in a seat when the camera pans over it. Neither here nor there, but you're right. The money has been spent, even if the literal butts in the seats aren't there, whether it be late in games that are out of hand or late in the season when they're around 8-8. I expect much better from the Steelers this year, but yeah, it could happen, but it would still take quite a bit.
It would take a lot for them to go 8-8.
To carve into that season ticket base, which is, of course, the lifeblood of any professional franchise. So thanks again for your help this week.
Happy to be here.
Brian Crawford, as always. And of course, he's the host of River Talk on this network, one of many talk programs that we have. In addition to the local music, I was happy to hear the Dove Wires on 105.9 The X a couple of weeks ago. In fact, they were on Edge of the X, so you hear them right here on this station. I was thinking, oh, that sounds familiar. So, yes, some of these bands are moving and shaking and rising up the hierarchy, and we're happy to give them that platform. First and foremost, we are about promoting them and promoting local talent, musical or otherwise. Time for some hockey talk before I sign off for another week here on the River's Edge. And Matt Cullen, the Penguins' 40-year-old centerman, back-to-back Stanley Cup champion. We'll never forget his performance in Game 6 at Nashville. He played the most minutes out of any Penguins forward, Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin included, because there were so many penalties to kill, and that's one of his specialties. So bravo to Matt Cullen for extending his career. Looks like he's going to play at least one more. Well, he is. He signed a contract with his home state, Minnesota Wild, on Wednesday. I think that hurt some Penguins fans who felt like if he came back, it was going to be with the Penguins. And to be fair to them, Matt Cullen did indicate as much on locker room cleanout day in late June. But the heart wants what the heart wants, and Matt said that it was a family decision. His family already lives up there in Minnesota in the offseason. They've traveled around a lot. Matt's been on a lot of teams just in the past 5 years since the previous time he played for the Wild. This will be his second stint with them. He has played for 2 teams in the Nashville Predators and the Pittsburgh Penguins. So they've moved. This will be their 4th move for the Cullen family, which has some young children, 3 young boys. The third move in the past 5 seasons. That's a lot. I know we take this for granted, and yeah, the rich and the famous have a little bit more of an advantage when it comes to handling the minutia and the practicalities of moving. All of us have dealt with that at one point or another, or most of us have. We know what a pain that is. It's easier if you have a few million in the bank and you can get people to help you with that sort of thing, but it's still not easy on the family. It's not easy on the kids, and Matt Cullen and his wife, Bridget, wanted their kids to have a stable base. They've been getting homeschooled at the Penguins rink the last 2 years, and that's worked out well, but you want to give these kids every chance to succeed. And at a certain point, even though the dad still wants to play, as Matt will, you have to compromise. And in this case, it's a pretty good compromise. You get to play hockey, maybe your last season, your 20th NHL season in your home state. So there will be no begrudgment from my perspective, on Matt Cullen's move back home. But it does leave the Penguins in a bit of a lurch, depending on your perspective. I don't have a problem with Carter Rowney, playoff hero, or at least playoff stalwart. I'm not sure he had any huge moments, but he was reliable. He was quite good from the Washington series on. He's slated as your 4th-line center. They still needed a 3rd-line center, but that was always going to be the case whether or not Matt Cullen came back. And if you're Jim Rutherford and you expect a player going on 41 years old to come back, and if you're banking on that, that's just short-sighted, and that's naive from my point of view. And I don't think Jim Rutherford was expecting Cullen to return. I think that would have been a bonus if he did. And now that he isn't, this team continues to get younger. They were one of the older teams in the NHL last year. This year, they're already below the median age, at least according to last year's metrics. So their average age is around 27. They were close to 30 last year, but they've lost 30-somethings in Mark Streit, didn't play much, but still up there. Ron Hainsey, Marc-Andre Fleury, Chris Kunitz, signed with the Lightning, of course. And so they have really dropped most of the players who are above average in NHL age. And with them pushing for a 3rd consecutive Stanley Cup and all the games and mileage that's piled up on these players, not the worst thing in the world to get younger. That means less reliable, of course. Who knows if a player, for instance, like Josh Archibald or even Carter Rowney at age 27, more of a pro veteran than most inexperienced players at this level. But who knows if these guys can do what Matt Cullen did. Can you lean on someone like that to play 19 minutes in the biggest game of the year, kill 5 penalties, take important defensive zone face-offs, that sort of thing? I don't know. You don't know. But the Penguins are playing with house money in a lot of ways at this point. And you know what got them to this point as well are the contributions of younger players. It was Brian Rust and Connor Sheary bursting on the scene in 2016 in the spring, and then it was someone like Jake Gensel in the spring of 2017. So you're going to need players on entry-level contracts, younger guys, to perform well in order to win in the NHL, even if you have the superstar talent, Crosby, Malkin, Letang. I'd even throw Matt Murray into that list of stars. You look at his results over the first 1.5 seasons of his career. I know he hasn't been a clear number 1 yet, but it appears he's one of the top young goaltenders in the NHL, and the Penguins are in a good spot there long term. So you talk state of the Pittsburgh sports scene, the Penguins are still number 1, and I don't see them dropping down as long as this management group is in charge. Jim Rutherford at the top, as long as Mike Sullivan is still a coach, and as long as Crosby and Malkin and Letang are still in their primes. They're getting toward the back end now. Perhaps 1 or 2 more years where you could really expect them to make a deep push into the playoffs. But despite all the wear and tear from back-to-back deep runs and back-to-back cup runs, you throw in the World Cup of Hockey last year for some of the top guys like Crosby, but they're going to get enough rest this summer, and they're going to have enough help from some younger legs, I think, this year to be just fine. Now, they'll need that third-line center, and so much of the Penguins' 2016 Cup was based upon having 3 scoring lines. Nick Bino was at his best that year. He wasn't last season, but let's not forget what he did in 16 and how dominant the Penguins were for most of that playoff run. This past year, they got by on elite finishing and elite goaltending, as I've talked about often on this program. But the blueprint was more the 16 team, where you can roll 3 scoring lines. That's the plan for the Penguins. And I don't know if Colorado's Matt Duchene, 26 years old, is still an option. The Penguins may have to trade one of their young defensemen, maybe an Olimata. I know Brian Dumoulin just signed, but you look at players like that who could provide value to a rebuilding team like Colorado. Those are options to move. And then there's also the wild card, college free agent Will Butcher. My DK Pittsburgh Sports colleague Tim Benz talked to Will Butcher's coach at the University of Denver, Jim Montgomery, and he seems to think, Montgomery that is, that Will Butcher, who just became a free agent after his contract offer from the Avalanche lapsed, Montgomery seems to think that Butcher is a great fit for what the Penguins do on the blue line. Maybe he doesn't step in right away, but if you sign him, then perhaps you can deal from a surplus on the back end and find a way to get that third-line center that way. It's probably going to have to be a trade because you look at the free agent market, there's no one left in terms of really any position, but especially at center. So Jim Rutherford, a man who's made many big trades, most of them promising in his time with the Penguins, he's got one more to make before this Penguins team is fully reloaded and ready to go. Will it be Matt Duchene? I'm not sure. I thought Eric Stahl or even Jordan Stahl, if they could find a way to squeeze that salary under the cap, could be fits too. But I have trust that Rutherford will be patient enough and be shrewd enough to get some value there and get the Penguins back to that 3-line depth that was so impressive in 2015-16. That, I think, is the biggest deal for the Penguins this year. Do they get back to a 3-line team? Can they spread the wealth? Or will they have to load up and maybe put Phil Kessel with Yevgeny Malkin? I don't think that's a bad thing, but of course the Penguins have been at their best when Kessel was on a productive third line and you had Crosby, Malkin, Kessel right down the line chart. That's the one concern for the Penguins, but overall, in a really, really good spot. That's it for me. I'm in a good spot here at Mr. Small's Theater. It's been fun being with you once again this week on Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge. For Brian Crawford, this is Matt Gike reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. Hope you enjoyed this week's show. Archived editions of the program are on riversedgepgh.com. I'll talk to you in 7 days' time, right back here on the banks of the Allegheny River.